It was supposed to be a dream come true. A family wins the lottery. Overnight, they become millionaires. But what happened next would haunt Australia forever. 8-year-old Graeme Thorne was on his way to school. A short walk from home, a route he took every morning. But on this day, he never arrived. No one saw him. No one heard him scream. And when the truth came out, it shocked the entire nation. This is the chilling true story of Australia's first high-profile kidnapping for ransom, and the greed that turned a millionaire's dream into every parent's worst nightmare. In June of 1960, their lives changed overnight in ways they could never have imagined. Basil Thorne held the winning ticket in the newly established Opera House Lottery, a government-run sweepstakes created to help fund the construction of what would become Australia's most iconic landmark, the Sydney Opera House. The prize, an astonishing £100,000. In today's money, it would be worth millions. It was a sum that could transform their lives, opening doors to a future they had never dreamed possible. They could buy their own home, provide Graeme with the best education, and never have to worry about financial struggles again. However, with great fortune came an unexpected consequence. The moment Basil Thorne's name was drawn as the winner, the media frenzy began. Newspapers plastered their faces across front pages, radio stations broadcast their excitement, and television reporters covered their newfound wealth with enthusiasm. In an instant, they became household names. The publicity was relentless, and suddenly everyone knew where they lived, how much money they had, and the fact that they had a young son. But was this exposure a blessing or a curse? The Thornes basked in their sudden fame, unaware that someone was watching them with far darker intentions. The horror truly set in when a phone call shattered the Thornes' world. A man with a foreign accent delivered a chilling message. "I have your boy. I want £25,000 before 5 o'clock this afternoon. I'm not fooling. If I don't get the money before 5 o'clock, I'll feed the boy to the sharks." Panic-stricken, the Thornes were faced with an unimaginable choice: comply with the demands and risk never seeing their son again, or involve the police and take an even greater risk. As they struggled with fear and uncertainty, they had no way of knowing the truth. The ransom call was a lie. Graeme Thorne was already gone. This case, the first known kidnapping for ransom in Australian history, would spark one of the most intense manhunts the country had ever seen. It would expose the dark consequences of publicized lottery wins, change laws forever, and haunt a nation. But the real question remains: when does good fortune become a curse? In the vibrant and ever-growing city of Sydney during the early 1960s, life was simple yet fulfilling for the Thorne family. Basil and Frida Thorne were everyday, hard-working Australians navigating the ups and downs of middle-class life. They lived modestly in a rented flat in Bondi, a picturesque beachside suburb known for its golden sands and crashing waves. Though they weren't wealthy, they provided a warm and loving home for their only child, Graeme, a bright and cheerful 8-year-old boy. Born on December 18, 1951, Graeme Thorne was a lively and inquisitive child with an adventurous spirit. He was well liked by his teachers and classmates, excelling in school and taking joy in sports and outdoor play. He had a deep love for animals and often dreamed of having a pet dog of his own one day. His parents doted on him, ensuring he had everything he needed, even if they had to make sacrifices. Stephen Leslie Bradley, born István Baranyai in Hungary, was a man whose life had once held promise but had taken a tragic and irreversible downward spiral. In his youth, he was a gifted violinist, known for his talent and potential. However, as the years passed, his life drifted far from the world of music and art, plunging into a series of poor decisions, financial misfortunes, and ultimately, crime. Bradley's path led him to Australia, where he sought a fresh start. But instead of finding prosperity, he struggled to make ends meet. Gambling had become a vice he couldn't escape, and with each passing day his financial troubles mounted. He owed large sums of money to various individuals, and his desperation grew. He needed a way out, fast. Then fate handed him what he believed was an opportunity. When news broke that Basil Thorne had won an astonishing £100,000 in the Opera House lottery, Bradley saw not just a lucky family, but a potential solution to his problems. The Thornes were ordinary middle-class people who had suddenly become rich overnight. Their names, faces, and even their home address were splashed across newspapers. In Bradley's mind, this made them the perfect target. Carefully, he began to observe the family, taking note of their daily routines. He learned that their 8-year-old son, Graeme, was picked up every morning by a family friend and driven to school. Bradley saw an opening, a moment in their schedule where security was lax. With meticulous planning, he crafted a ransom note, outlining his demands. He calculated where he would take Graeme, how he would contact the Thornes, and how he would collect the money. It all seemed foolproof in his mind. He envisioned himself walking away with the ransom and starting over, free from debt and worry. But what Bradley failed to consider was the unpredictability of crime. Kidnapping was not as simple as a transaction. A child was not a piece of property to be exchanged for money. And the moment he took Graeme, the situation spiraled out of control in ways he had not anticipated. His reckless plan, born out of desperation and greed, would soon unravel, with tragic and irreversible consequences. Do you think financial desperation can push someone to commit such a crime, or was Bradley's greed the real driving force? The morning of July 7th, 1960, began like any other for 8-year-old Graeme Thorne. He dressed neatly in his school uniform, had breakfast with his family, and prepared for his usual routine. His parents, Basil and Frida Thorne, had no reason to suspect that this day would be any different from the ones before. At approximately 8:30 a.m., Graeme stepped outside his family's Bondi home, waiting for his usual ride to school. For the past few months, a close family friend had been picking him up and dropping him off each day. But that morning, something was off. At 8:40 a.m., several witnesses noticed a strange car double-parked near the corner of Francis and Wellington Streets, not far from the Thorne residence. The vehicle was distinctive. An iridescent blue 1955 Ford Custom Line, a car that stood out in the suburban streets. Shortly after, passers-by saw a man speaking with Graeme. He was dressed neatly, appearing composed, and seemed to engage the boy in a brief conversation. No one could have imagined the horror that was about to unfold. Moments later, Graeme got into the car, and as the door shut behind him, it sped away. He never arrived at school that day. By 9:30 a.m., Frida Thorne began to worry. Graeme should have been safely at school, but something didn't feel right. Her concern grew into panic when the phone rang at 9:40 a.m., exactly 70 minutes after Graeme had left home. The voice on the line belonged to a man with a thick foreign accent, speaking in a slow and deliberate tone. His words sent a chill through Frida's body. "I have your boy. I want £25,000 before 5 o'clock this afternoon. I'm not fooling. If I don't get the money before 5 o'clock, I'll feed the boy to the sharks." By sheer coincidence, Sergeant Larry O'Shea, a Bondi police officer, had already arrived at the Thorne household a few minutes earlier. Frida, struggling to comprehend what was happening, passed the phone to O'Shea, who quickly took charge. Disguising his voice, he pretended to be Basil Thorne. He needed to buy time. The detective feigned uncertainty about the ransom sum, stating that it would be difficult to gather such a large amount on such short notice. Unbeknownst to the kidnapper, he had no idea about the Thorne family's recent lottery win. The kidnapper, agitated but firm, instructed Basil to have the money ready by 5 p.m., promising to call back with further instructions. Before the officer could probe for more details, the line went dead. The Thorne family was thrown into a waking nightmare. Hours passed, each second stretching into an eternity. Would the kidnapper call back? Was Graeme still safe? Could they trust the abductor to return him if they complied? As the minutes ticked closer to the deadline, police officers set up phone surveillance, hoping to trace the next call. At 9:47 p.m., 4 hours past the deadline, the phone rang again. This time, a different officer answered, once again pretending to be Basil Thorne. The kidnapper, unaware of the deception, began to issue new instructions. The money, he explained, was to be placed in 2 paper bags. But just as quickly as the call began, it ended. The kidnapper abruptly hung up, leaving the Thornes and the police in agonizing uncertainty. At this moment, Basil Thorne faced an impossible choice. Should he risk calling the police and jeopardizing his son's life, or should he gather the ransom and comply with the demands, hoping Graeme would be safely returned? If you were Basil Thorne, what would you have done? Would you have trusted the authorities or attempted to handle the ransom on your own? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The disappearance of Graeme Thorne sent shockwaves throughout Australia, shaking the country to its core. It was the first known kidnapping for ransom in Australian history, and the crime left the public in a state of fear and outrage. The idea that a child could be taken from a safe suburban neighborhood in broad daylight was unthinkable. Parents became increasingly anxious, holding their children closer, questioning their safety in a way they never had before. The press was relentless, with newspapers, radio stations, and television reports broadcasting updates as the story gripped the nation. Reporters flooded the Thornes neighborhood, eager for any developments. The tragedy of a young boy taken from his loving family struck a chord, igniting public sympathy and anger. Would the kidnapper negotiate? Would Graeme be returned? Or was this case about to take a far more tragic turn? The New South Wales police force launched one of the largest manhunts in the country's history, determined to track down the kidnapper and bring Graeme home. Every lead was meticulously analyzed, every witness statement scrutinized, and every clue followed. Investigators focused on the ransom calls, listening carefully for any background noise that might give away the caller's location. They also studied his voice, trying to pinpoint his accent, age, and nationality. Meanwhile, witnesses came forward, providing a key detail. They had seen a blue 1955 Ford Custom Line parked suspiciously near the Thorne residence on the morning of Graeme's disappearance. But despite this critical piece of information, police struggled to identify the driver. The car had no known connection to the Thorne family, and with no license plate number or clear description of the suspect, investigators hit a frustrating dead end. Days passed, and with no ransom payment arranged, people began to fear the worst. The lack of progress in the case sent waves of panic through Sydney and beyond. Parents who once felt comfortable letting their children walk to school alone were now terrified at the thought. For the first time, Australians were confronted with a terrifying reality. Money could make you a target, and even the innocent were not safe. The community rallied behind the Thorne family, offering support and praying for Graeme's safe return. But beneath the hope, a darker question lingered. Had the kidnapper ever intended to return Graeme at all? At this point in the case, what do you believe happened to Graeme? Do you think the kidnapper was ever planning to release him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. On August 16, 1960, nearly 6 weeks after Graeme Thorne's disappearance, a local man was out for a routine walk with his dog in a quiet, bushy area of Seaforth, a suburb in Sydney. The dog, sniffing around near some thick vegetation, suddenly became fixated on a strange bundle wrapped in a blanket. Curious and uneasy, the man approached cautiously, noticing the edges of a blue tartan picnic blanket poking through the underbrush. As he got closer, a horrific realization dawned upon him. This was not just discarded fabric. Shaken, he quickly contacted the police, who arrived shortly after. Officers slowly unwrapped the bundle, and what they discovered confirmed the worst fears of an entire nation. It was the body of Graeme Thorne. Even after weeks of exposure to the elements, Graeme was still fully dressed in his school uniform, a tragic reminder of the morning he was taken. His hands and feet were bound with string, and his mouth had been gagged with a scarf. Forensic examination revealed that Graeme had suffered multiple injuries, including cuts, abrasions, and significant trauma to his head and body. His cause of death was determined to be either asphyxiation, a skull fracture, or a combination of both. The examination also uncovered unexpected forensic clues. Traces of brick dust, mortar, and dog hairs were found on Graeme's clothing and body. At first, these details seemed insignificant, but they would soon become pivotal in solving the case. At the time, forensic science was still developing, but this case demonstrated how small details could help reconstruct a crime. The presence of brick dust and mortar suggested Graeme had been kept in or near a construction site or a location with recent renovations. The dog hairs indicated the suspect owned or had access to a pet. This evidence gave police a new direction, leading them closer to identifying Graeme's killer. In the coming weeks, investigators would painstakingly match these clues to a single suspect, a man who had gambled everything on a ransom plan gone terribly wrong. How do you think forensic science changed criminal investigations after this case? Do you believe modern technology would have solved this crime faster? Let's discuss in the comments. Despite weeks of fear and uncertainty, forensic evidence finally provided the breakthrough police needed. Every clue, the brick dust, the rare conifer needles, and the distinctive Pekingese dog hairs, led them to one man, Stephen Leslie Bradley. Investigators conducted a thorough background check on Bradley, discovering a history of financial troubles, a failed career, and a desperate need for money. His sudden disappearance from Australia shortly after Graeme's kidnapping raised further suspicion. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. As the net closed in on him, authorities learned that Bradley had fled the country with his family, seeking refuge overseas. But he had underestimated the determination of Australian law enforcement. With the cooperation of international authorities, he was tracked down, arrested, and extradited back to Australia to face justice. When Bradley stood trial, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Experts testified that the brick dust and mortar on Graeme's body were a perfect match to those found at Bradley's home. The rare conifer needles that had been transferred onto the victim's clothing came from a tree species growing in Bradley's yard. The Pekingese dog hairs were traced back to his family's pet dog. It was clear Bradley had kidnapped Graeme, kept him at his home, and something had gone terribly wrong. While the prosecution painted Bradley as a cold-blooded murderer, his defense insisted that Graeme's death was an accident, the result of a ransom scheme gone horribly wrong. Regardless of his intentions, the jury found him guilty of Graeme Thorne's murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Graeme's tragic case sent shockwaves across the nation, marking Australia's first known kidnapping for ransom. The brutal crime led to major legal reforms, particularly in the way lottery winners were handled in public announcements. No longer would winners' full names and addresses be freely published, reducing the risk of similar tragedies. Additionally, this case highlighted the power of forensic science. The thorough analysis of dust, plant material, and animal hairs played a crucial role in solving the crime, proving that even the smallest details could bring a killer to justice. Yet, despite the conviction, a haunting question remains. Did Stephen Bradley intentionally kill Graeme Thorne? Or was the boy's death the result of a botched ransom plot, an outcome that Bradley had never intended? Some argue that Bradley was merely a desperate man who panicked when his plan went wrong, while others believe he was a remorseless predator who never intended to let Graeme go free. The tragic story of Graeme Thorne serves as a chilling reminder of how sudden fortune can invite unforeseen dangers. Some crimes shake a nation, others change it forever. The case of Graeme Thorne did both. It was that significant. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was the first major ransom case in Australian history. It was the moment Australia realized that wealth, especially when flaunted, could make you a target. And it was a crime that led to legal changes still in place. Today, before 1960, Australia was not a country familiar with ransom kidnappings. Crimes like these were something people read about happening overseas, far from home. But the abduction of an 8-year-old boy in broad daylight changed everything. Suddenly, a nation known for its safety was forced to confront a new, terrifying reality. Money could make you a target, and the consequences could be fatal. Parents no longer felt safe letting their children walk alone. The fear of being watched, of being followed, became real. And for law enforcement, this crime was a wake-up call. It exposed a vulnerability in their response system, one that had to be fixed before history could repeat itself. In 1960, winning the lottery meant more than just a windfall. It meant unwanted attention. It was common practice for newspapers to publish the names, photographs, and even home addresses of lottery winners. At the time, it seemed harmless. But in reality, it was an open invitation to those with sinister intentions. Because of this case, everything changed. Authorities and lottery organizations realized that publicizing winners was a dangerous practice. Over time, privacy protections were put in place to ensure winners had the choice to remain anonymous, a safeguard that might have saved Graeme Thorne's life. The Graeme Thorne case was one of the first major Australian crimes where forensic science played a crucial role in solving the mystery. Soil analysis, fiber evidence, and trace elements helped detectives piece together the crime, leading them to the perpetrator. This case proved the value of forensic evidence, pushing Australia's law enforcement into a new era of criminal investigation. It set a precedent. No longer could cases rely solely on witness testimony. Science would now play a key role in catching criminals. The kidnapping and murder of Graeme Thorne was more than just a crime. It was a turning point. It reshaped public awareness, redefined safety precautions, and forced Australia to reevaluate how it handled privacy, law enforcement, and personal security. To this day, Graeme's case serves as a painful reminder of how sudden fortune can invite unforeseen dangers, and sometimes the price of fame is far too high. Do you believe lottery winners' identities should remain private to prevent crimes like this? Or do you think transparency is necessary? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this case compelling, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more true crime stories. Thank you for watching. Remember to stay vigilant and cherish the safety of your loved ones.